For the most part, we are a compassionate people. But what happens when we are faced with those who have not? Just like so many communities in the country, Galveston is currently dealing with an issue of rebuilding and replacing low-income housing destroyed by Hurricane Ike. This current situation has led us to ask, whose responsibility is it to care for those who do not have or cannot afford acceptable housing? What programs are in place to help the disadvantaged? What is the cost of all of this to our citizens and our community? And what of the fear, anger, and confusion that is tied to this difficult situation? Tonight, the problems facing public housing. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Representative Debbie Riddle, Texas House of Representatives, District 150. Dr. Edward Pringle Sr., Field Office Director, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Field Policy and Management, and Mayor Joe Jaworski, City of Galveston. Before we start, remember you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome to the guests. I want to start right off, Dr. Pringle. When we talk about housing, oftentimes we think about the homeless needing a place to live. But when you talk about unemployment, you talk about the unemployed and the underemployed. When we get to people in the housing situation, you have the homeless. What do we call people who are underhoused, the people who are in substandard housing? Is there terminology for this?
I don't know if there's a certain terminology, but it certainly points to the fact that they're in need. Cities will rally around that, and that's the main point of their sustainability in helping their citizens. From the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development standpoint of view, we help those cities to become sustainable and maintain their core in helping the citizens, because that's where the strength is, right there with the citizens. Great leadership. We look for great leadership in the cities, and we provide funding where it's possible to help those. But we don't have a name per se, as you mentioned, for the individual. We look at them as citizens in need.
Mm-hmm. Representative Riddle, when we talk about the housing situation, from your point of view and what you believe, who should be responsible for taking care of those who cannot afford, I keep using the term acceptable housing. I guess we're not looking at the homeless per se in this discussion, but those who need a place to stay and are living in substandard levels.
Well, I don't know that it is the responsibility of the government to provide everything. We have the people in our country, the people in our state and in our communities have a large heart. They're compassionate. But the problem that we run into frequently with the low-income housing projects is people come in, they do not have the same type of pride of ownership, if you will, so the properties tend to decline a great deal. They also become breeding nests for drugs and crime, and I've got to tell you, this isn't a pleasant thing to talk about, or it isn't a pleasant thing to bring out, but it is true. I can tell you about projects like that in and around my own district, mm-hmm. where that has occurred. An increase of crime, an increase of drugs, an increase of everything that a community really does not want. I think that when individuals build apartment complexes, most of the time, and I just visited with you in the green room about this, most of the time they go through HUD. Those are for everyone. Those are for anyone that wants to go ahead and lease an apartment in that area, in that particular complex. But there are always a certain number of those in any complex that are for those that are of lower income. No one has to know, that they carry the same dignity as everyone else. But the problem is when you've got a low-income housing project, everyone knows that, the children know that, and it creates a multitude of problems and a multitude of issues and a multitude of problems with the tax base and the demands of that where the tax base isn't there to support it.
Okay, and we're going to talk a lot more about all of that in a second, but Mayor, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in here, and I don't even know if I need to ask a question. I'll let you just come off what the representative said.
Well, I was appreciating Representative Riddle's remarks, because what she's just described is the case for mixed-income housing. In other words, there is a way to address low and very low-income eligible tenants, and the best way to do that is to make it blend either into an existing neighborhood, or if it's a new development that's being built, in a mixed-income format where it's not a project anymore. Those were built literally before the Civil Rights Act, and they obviously were a part of a zeitgeist that is long ago gone. Now that projects are routinely being torn down when money and political will are available, and in the absence of money and political will, sometimes natural disaster is the precipitating event. Such was the case in Galveston. What I have been presented with is an opportunity to banish poverty once and for all, at least as far as public housing goes. And this is the challenge before us.
I want to go into this, and I want to be as delicate as possible as we talk about it, because it's a difficult situation. But what the representative was just saying, too, when you look at how it ends up being segregated into these crime centers and all of this problem and all of that happens with public housing, when you talk about breaking it up throughout the community, is that then going to end those problems? Does that, and any of you can feel free to jump in here, when you separate out the low-income housing, does it truly get absorbed into the community, or does it end up still formulating in pockets?
Let me take a shot at that. In Galveston, what we're emphasizing is it's not enough just to build a structure with 4 walls and a roof. There has to be supportive services as well. We all get them in one respect or another. That's the whole concept behind public education, frankly. Now, when you're talking about working poor or veterans or disabled or elderly, it's not enough at times to meet a reasonable need by providing just housing. If you can provide transportation, if you can sometimes provide daycare, you can really make a chink in the armor of what we consider poverty, described loosely as some of society's ills. I agree personal responsibility is a critical element in this, but let's all face it. If there is a struggling single mother with children who need some help so that she can go work, that as a society is something that we can mutually support.
Dr. Pringle, let me take you to the point about if, in fact, HUD, the way I think most people think of it is that these are communities that are set up that are low-income communities. Is that factual? Is that what these housing developments are, or are they being broken up throughout the community? Is this being diversified?
HUD is looking at diversity, as you mentioned, and as the mayor indicated. Mixed income housing is very, very important. It's vital in the community.
Explain what that means, so help our audience understand exactly what you're saying.
Mixed income housing, you've got a lower tier of people that make a certain amount of money, and you've got some that make a little bit more, but they're mixing together, and as the representative said, you don't see the difference there if they're both education, and that's a key fact. Education for all those individual families in supporting what they're doing. They need to know that as they live here, they have responsibility. And of course now the leadership in that particular apartment complex or wherever they're living to make sure that those rules are adhered to. And then when you look from the mayor's standpoint of view, the city has a responsibility of following through, making sure that everybody has an opportunity. And from a HUD standpoint of view, we're providing the funding and the oversight to say this is what we're doing to have you have and maintain a sustainable community. And that's the objective of what HUD is doing now, to make sure these communities are sustainable, that they're able to take care of themselves and provide for their particular families. And that's important.
But just putting those, let me jump in
please.
here a minute. Just putting a low-income housing project in an affluent community does not necessarily create a happy mix. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite happens. The mixing of the income levels, if you will, I think is done better when there is an apartment complex and certain numbers of those apartments are for this income and certain for other and certain for other. And then that way, no one is branded with the scarlet letter, low income on them. Children understand. Nobody has to tell a child. I mean, these kids know. And so when they're mixed in, but there has also got to be a level of accountability. I call it the rent-a-car syndrome. We all know that when you go and rent a car, and it can be a brand new, smelling good rent-a-car, you go out and you drive it and you park close and you do what you need to do, and you're not going to bang it up intentionally, but you don't take near the care of it. I've got a brand new car. I park way out in the South 40, and I don't want anybody near me because I don't want anybody opening up a door next to me. That is the difference. When there is a pride of ownership, or when there is significant accountability, when people are involved for taking care of the graffiti, when people are involved with making sure that the upkeep, get the teenagers out there mowing that lawn, get the kids in there painting and doing so everybody is pulling on the same team.
So currently you have, if you are living in one of these homes, you have none of the upkeep responsibilities are put on the actual individuals living there. Is that true or false? How does that break down?
Yes, anywhere you live, whether you're living in a home situation where they're mixed income, or if you even stay in an apartment, everybody has a responsibility. That's why I mentioned earlier, the leadership has to follow through and make sure that people are educated. They know before they get into the situation what's expected of them, and then everybody follows through in keeping up your particular area.
Yeah, but that's keeping up your particular apartment. I'm talking about the unit as a whole. To where you've got teams maybe that plant the flowers and take pride in how it looks. I know that I've got a low-income housing project in my district that is next to a very nice neighborhood that's quite affluent, but quite frankly, it's caused kind of the whole area to go down. Nobody there it's always somebody else's job to mow the area or plant the flowers. They expect somebody else to do that. No, I'm saying that if people are going to fall into this, it's not, this type of situation should not be a handout, as the term goes. It needs to be a hand up. And we make a huge mistake when we do nothing more than create an area that breeds crime, breeds gangs, and breeds the violence that goes with it. We do a great disservice, a huge disservice, to the people of the community as a whole, and to the children especially. And this has a huge impact on in the schools as well.
I'm going to turn this whole conversation for a second because there's something going on down in Galveston I really want to make sure we address here.
Sure.
And all of the complaints you're hearing and all of the issues that we're talking about, you're facing right now in Galveston with a situation where, if I understand correctly, Galveston got a certain amount of money from the federal government. One of the stipulations was to replace the housing that was destroyed by Ike. Correct so far?
Yes, sir.
You got the money started being spent, but those haven't been replaced yet, so they need to be replaced.
Correct.
Now people don't want to replace them. I'll let you take it from there. What is the situation?
Well, what's interesting is the amount of money that Galveston got as disaster funds for Ike is over $700 million. A very small portion of that is dedicated toward replacing the public housing that was built in the Truman and Eisenhower administrations. $600 million plus is for private homes that people have had in their families, infrastructure, $80 million wastewater treatment plant. So let's be real clear that the money that the federal government appropriated for Texas, which was to the tune of $3 billion, Galveston's going to get about $700 million of that. Now, the public housing units that were pulled down, I think everyone applauded because they were projects, like Representative Riddle describes, worse probably than what you had in your neighborhood. These were poverty campuses, frankly, and again, they were built in the 40s, and they looked like it. Now, when the fair housing concerns in Texas are being met, and it's not just a partisan issue. I mean, the governor supports this. We all receive federal money, local jurisdictions, as does the state. You have to follow certain restrictions. People sometimes discredit it by saying, don't take federal money, there's strings attached. But that's like saying, let's secede from the state, and I don't think anyone credibly wants to do that. So when you get money from HUD, you have to affirmatively further fair housing. Well, that's a fairly amorphous concept unless you are a technical expert, a legal expert. What this really means locally is we have a continuum of need in Galveston. You have surgeons working at UTMB, but you also have people changing the bed sheets at UTMB. I would like that whole universe of born on the island or islander by choice folks who want to live in Galveston, who are participating members of the community, to live in Galveston. We like having people in our churches. We like having full Little League teams. We like people eating at our restaurants. I like it that we have so many people working in Galveston. Do you know that we have a huge commuter issue, though? 20,000 people leave the island every night. I'd like to get some of them to live here. That's why affordable housing, not just public housing, but affordable housing makes sense for a community like Galveston, which has a huge anchor institution like UTMB, a wonderful tourism element that has people making lots of money, middle amount of money, and low-income money. If you can provide a certain reasonable level of housing for them, and mixed income units are the way to do it, then you can have a very healthy community.
Okay, anybody listening is going to be like, okay, so what's the issue? But there is an issue here. There is housing that needs to be rebuilt to replace that housing that was torn down and destroyed.
Sure.
So where is the issue? What is the problem with that? People don't want that housing rebuilt? They don't want you to have low-income housing on the island? What's going on?
I think the opposition is not necessarily a monolith. You know, there's some people who literally don't want any public housing rebuilt. And unfortunately, that's not my choice, and it's not their choice. There was, always a need for affordable housing in Galveston. Our worst-looking public housing was removed, and there was an agreement signed twice, actually, once as a settlement agreement between Lone Star Legal Aid and the Public Housing Agency that pulled down the projects, and later incorporated into an agreement that the state of Texas itself signed off on with HUD, saying that Galveston shall rebuild a certain number of public housing units, 569. It's our desire to build some of them as single-family homes. It's our desire to build some of them in a mixed income format like the representative and Dr. Pringle were discussing, because that is the state of the art in America, where you have market rate, workforce housing, and some public housing, so you don't have this scarlet A. They all look the same, and it's privately managed, which is a real plus. And we also want to do some of the public housing in existing apartment and single-family homes, sort of a mixed portfolio. I think the opposition is largely based on the fact that the public housing looked so bad before the hurricane that our harshest critics can't believe it'll ever be any better. And what I'm telling them is, folks, there's leadership here. Let us do our job.
Okay, I'm going to throw this out to all of you there, and that would be simply, and it's uncomfortable to say, but everybody, I would say most people are like, not in our yard. It's fine if there's public housing, but I don't want it in my neighborhood. I don't want it in my building. I don't want it in my city. I don't want it around me. I'm going to go to Dr. Pringle. I said for all of you, but I'm going to Dr. Pringle on this. I'm guessing that's something you folks face all the time over at HUD, that they're always saying, yes, great that you're doing it, just don't do it here. So where do you do it then?
That's correct. We do hear that quite often. One of the things that our Secretary and Assistant Secretary for Housing points out that, that's really borderline only being illegal in the sense that your citizens can't stay. If they can pay, they should be able to stay. And anything short of that becomes a legal issue. But yes, we do hear that, not in my backyard. One of the things important to understand is the education process of citizens, the community, the leaders, and how to go forward. If you get all those factors working together, then you come up with a viable, sustainable community. Anytime, give you an example, Harristock. You know about the Harristock apartments here in Houston. Many people have shunned that for years. The Department of HUD, community leaders, legal attorneys, and all the people associated in this area work to sort of clean that up. You've probably seen the reports about the gangs being put in jail and
Is that the
moving
Pat
out of that.
Lycos did the whole indictment
That
against
is
them
correct.
and all that?
That is correct.
Yeah.
We worked to make that. It took us a year in doing that.
Explain what happened there, what they did.
Okay. From a Department of HUD standpoint of view, we came in and we worked collaboratively with that group. We identified the challenges. What were the challenges? Why didn't people want to live here? There were drug-related issues. There were a lot of maybe prostitution, all type of things that you don't want to see in your community. Yes, you got low-income people, but there were some people who wanted to stay there. They had children. And you got all these things going around you, whereas you had individuals renting apartments, then subleasing them out to somebody else for drugs. You had a problem there. So they had to go in and clean that up, identify and place people, actually incarcerate people for illegal activity on there. Right now, it's looking a lot better. We've been out there several times over the course of a year to make sure that that's a place where you can go and live and enjoy yourself, go to school. These kids need to go to school, the education. Without the education, you had businesses come in and say, look, we'll take these kids on tours now and show them the better side of what they can do. Now, this is a foundation. Now, you've got older people there, but the kids, you got a foundation where you can set, and they got vision now. They can say, yes, I'd like to be a pilot.
But I got to tell you, that you're talking about Haverstock.
Yes.
And years ago, I rode the ambulance as an EMT. We didn't refer to it as Haverstock. We referred to it as Haverhell.
It was.
And let me tell you why. Because we could not take an ambulance in there, regardless of what the call was, without two police department squad cars and armed. Our paramedics, we all wore flak jackets. They actually turned an ambulance over. It was extremely dangerous.
Sure.
It was very dangerous. At one point, I didn't have a flak jacket on, and I was there, and the only ones around that were not armed or flak jacketed up were the children and me. This was not a pretty situation.
Right, but isn't that what they're saying? That they noticed it wasn't. They saw that this was a problem.
Noticed it wasn't, for heaven's sakes. It was horrible.
But then they put in, if I understand, they put in
Actually,
programs.
it burned. Actually, Haverstock burned. It burned to the ground. Folks kind of went out and fled, and then it has been built back up. But this is what we want to avoid. And I'm going to tell you, not in my backyard kind of a thing. People have a right when they invest in their home, when they work hard and do what is necessary to go to school, work hard, sacrifice, and in order to accomplish their goals and work in their community and work in their neighborhood and work to build their businesses and rear their children, who are we? Who is the government to come in and shove something down their throat?
Okay, I'm gonna cut you off a little bit here because I know we're running out of time. And let me say, Mayor. So then, who does? Whose responsibility is it? What do we do with these people? They are in our community.
Right, and you have two real choices. One is to let the market, as it is, unregulated, address it, or you can have some government oversight, and you can make that oversight in what you would expect, at least, which is code enforcement, or have some subsidy. I try to look at it holistically. I mean, you and I, if you own a home, enjoy a very decent government subsidy because there's a policy to encourage home ownership. So we have the mortgage income deduction. If you are choosing not to own a home, and it seems like, especially in urban communities, more and more people are renting, or at least those are the developments that are being made available. Theoretically, I don't really object to there being some subsidy of that as well for someone who will otherwise abide by the rules. I think what people then criticize is, well, you're social engineering. It's really not that at all. We want to have a healthy community. Use Galveston again as an example. Our population took quite a hit, not just from Hurricane Ike, but from decades of neglect in some of the important things that make a community healthy. People have voted with their feet, and they have moved to the north end of the county because they wanted to live in a different kind of situation. So Galveston has an opportunity right now to...
You have an opportunity to finish in 30 seconds to tell
to
me.
redefine itself, and one of those things is housing opportunities. Right now, we want to have more housing choice. There are vacancies in some of the old apartments for a reason, because people do not choose to live there. And so we are now building some very reasonable number of mixed income developments that will give market, middle, and low-income working families an opportunity to live in a great corridor.
In the 10 seconds left, Dr. Pringle, finishing words.
Finishing word. I think the opportunity for housing is very great in this country and in our areas. There are a lot of opportunities for low income, affluent, but the concerns that I would have, and I think HUD would have, if we place them in just one area and then somebody in another area, you're going to have the challenges that we've had over the years. We want to make sure that people, if they can stay in a place and pay for it, then they have the opportunity to do that.
I'm going to have to stop you right there. They're really panicked there. So I'm going to say now, thank you all for coming in and talking about that. Remember, each week you can visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org/Houston8, where you can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Reminder, next week on Houston 8, a look at the changing role of women in business with best-selling author Nina Gadawala. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us. Good night.